Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for choosing to spend an hour with me here on this Friday afternoon. I appreciate it. This session is interpreting your NRS data for program success. My name is Doug Weimer. If you'll notice, there's the Maryland flag on everything. That's because I am not in Ohio, so apologies to the Buckeye State. I am in Maryland. My name is Doug Weimer. As I said, I work for the Maryland Department of Labor. The Maryland Department of Labor is the agency that oversees Title II funding for Maryland. I am an adult education program specialist. I oversee data reporting and performance management for the state of Maryland for adult education. Very briefly, my background, just so you understand how I got here, is I do have 3 years experience as a K-12 ESL teacher overseas. I was a middle school math teacher for 5 years. I have experience in adult education at the community college level for several years as an adjunct ESL instructor, an ESL coordinator, and also an adult literacy and ESL director before I joined the Maryland Department of Labor. I was also on the MACE board, MACE being Maryland's version of this organization that sponsors this conference. And I was on the board, and I was also the president for a brief period of time. So that's a little bit about me, but that's not why we're here today. So our objectives today is I want to review NRS tables. Don't worry. If you're familiar with them, you'll know that there's a lot of NRS tables. We are not going over all of them. I just want to hit on some highlights. And then I want to talk about how we can use those tables to close the loop and to look at trend data. I want to talk a little bit about telling your story. I want to talk about further analysis you can do with that. And then hopefully, if you have any questions, I look forward to fielding them at the time. Just so you know, I am going to be using Poll Everywhere today. So if you could just take a moment and either open a new browser window and go to that website, or you could text, or if you are so inclined, you can also scan the QR code on your screen. Now, this link will be up during the slides that use Poll Everywhere, but if you want to go ahead and take a moment to access that, that would be great. Okay, so the first question I want to know is I'd like to know who I have with us today, what your role is in adult education. So once you get Poll Everywhere up, and if you haven't gotten it yet, I have it typed into the chat as well as it's on the top of the screen right now. Let me know what your role is. If you're an instructor, if you're a local program administrator or staff, if you're on the state staff, if you're with a federal agency, a vendor, if you're a student or other. If you just take a moment to let me know, that way I can make sure I tailor things to your needs. Okay, so at this point, it looks like it's mostly local program staff and also one person from the state staff. That's great. This will be applicable to you. So I hope you're able to take something from this session back with you to your local program. Now, one more question before we get into the meat of this is I'd like to know, why are you at this session? So if you could just take a moment, just type a few words, sentence, whatever it is. What made you choose this session today? Is it because you felt this was the best one at this time? You're an NRS newbie? If you want to use more data in your program, just let me know. Why are you here today? Okay, love to focus on data. Great, me too. I love data. Okay. Always interested in using data more effectively. Great. Because it was about the NRS and I'm office staff. Hey, that's how it works. Someone in the chat said to improve our NRS data. Great. I do have the chat window up in Zoom, so if you're not able to use Poll Everywhere, I can check it there as well. Newbie to my position and want to use more data in our program. Great. Find out more about the NRS levels. Okay, great. I'd like to improve how we use data in our program. Okay, well, I think that this is an appropriate session for you. We're definitely going to talk about NRS data, and we're going to talk about how we can use it in our programs to do some analysis, and also some thoughts about where you can go for the next step. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about some NRS tables. Now, like I said, we're not going to talk about all of them, but we're going to hit on some key tables that I use the most often at the state office, and also the ones I think that are the most useful for local programs. Just to review, what is the NRS, especially for the newbie we have in our midst? NRS is the accountability system that we use for federally funded adult education programs. So basically, it is the way that we can compare one program's outcome to another, one state or territory's outcome to another, and also convert that into something that can be reported at the federal level for decision makers, policymakers, legislators, and so forth. Why would we want to use NRS tables for analysis? Well, first of all, you probably already have access to them. So I'm not familiar with Ohio's database system, which you use, but most systems will print out NRS tables, as well as it's something you can do manually. I know definitely at the state level, of course, you have to have the NRS tables because you have to be able to use those to report out to Octave. Like I said, it's incorporated into some adult literacy databases. Also, sometimes you can even run NRS tables on a subset of students. Also, it's a standardized baseline comparison for our programs. It is only one way to look at the programs, and I'm not an advocate for saying that assessment data and using these tables is the only way to judge or to determine how we can improve our programs. Not at all. But at the same way, this is how the policymakers are making decisions. So we have to make sure that we understand how it's being communicated up the chain to the federal level, and also what we can get out of that information. So today we're going to talk about tables 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4B. And I'm going to go into each one of those here in just a moment. There are a lot more tables than that, but these are the tables that people tend to use the most often. So first of all, table 1. This is a typical NRS table. This table shows you all of the participants in your program based on their entering educational functioning level, ethnicity, and sex. So we see down the left side of the table, a lot of the NRS tables show you the NRS level on the left side. Now remember, for those tables that are organized this way, this is their entering level. So if someone shows up at ABE level 4, that means that they started that program year at AB level 4. If they make a gain to AB level 5 and they still keep going this year, that's awesome, but their information is going to show up under AB level 4. Going to the right, going across the table, we have all of the ethnicities that are in the NRS, and then that's further broken down into male or female. Remember, of course, we don't have any allowance at this time to do non-binary, other genders, so it has to be male or female. Table 2 shows you on the left side the participant age, and then going across, broken down by ethnicity and sex. Keep in mind when you look at table 2, these age groups are not the same. So we have the 16 to 18-year-old age group, which of course are our pre-high school graduate students that may have withdrawn. We have 19 to 24, and then the next group is 25 to 44. So that's a large group of people. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this and you're saying, hey, there's a lot of people in this group. Well, it also contains a lot more ages than the other groups. So table 2, table 3 shows us on the left side the program type, so adult basic education, adult secondary ed, English language acquisition, or IELCE, and also shows you what age range that those participants are in. Also notice that within each program type, there's a subset for any of those students that are in an integrated education and training program. So if someone is in, and let me pull up my little pointer here. If someone is in an English language acquisition program, they're going to show up on this row. If they are also in an IET, they're going to show up here too, but this would always be a subset of the English language acquisition group. Now, before we talk about how to use this data, a little caveat. Using demographic data on our students can lead to making generalizations about a student based on their race, based on their ethnicity, based on their sex, and based on their age. So Be careful when you do that. You're using this to help improve your program to best meet the needs of your students. So let's go back to table 1. Remember, table 1 shows you the EFL level, and it shows you their ethnicity and their sex. I've cut the table down a little bit so it's easier to read. So this is just the ESL section of our table. Let's look at the Asian section of the ESL population. Under this table, we see that the ESL population that identifies as Asian represents 85 students, that's 49 to 36, out of 925 ESL students, which is about 9%. The question I would ask you is, does this match the census data for your area? So if we're thinking about enrollment targets, if we see that this is 9% of our data, is the English language learner population of adults in your county, in your jurisdiction, et cetera, is it about 9%? Is it underserving this population? Is it overperforming this population? Something to think about. Also, if you look at this data over time, is this showing an upward trend in enrollment, a downward trend in enrollment? And is it showing that there's a population that needs services, in this case, ESL services, that are not being reached? So that's one thing you can do with table 1. I'm going to skip ahead to table 3 because table 2 also shows us demographic information. But table 3, let's say that we have 2 different program years of table 3. So here we have program year 2017 and here we have program year 2018. In program year 2017, we had 351 students in the 19 to 24-year-old category and 1,114 in the 25 to 44 category. Okay. In program year 18, we see that the 19 to 24 went from 351 to 498. The 25 to 44 went from 1114 to 1150. Okay. Doing a little bit of math, don't be afraid of math, we can find out that this represents 18% of our population, the 19 to 24-year-old group. But in the next year, it represented 24% of our population. So we saw that the 19 to 24-year-old group increased as a percentage of our total. The 25 to 44 dropped a little bit. So I have a question for you, and I'm going to ask you this in just a second. If we see the proportion of 19 to 24-year-olds in the ABE and ASE population increased, while the proportion of 25 to 44-year-olds decreased, what should we consider to adjust our programming? So once again, if we see that the 19 to 24-year-old group increased, but the 25 to 44 decreased, in what way should we adjust our programming? And so I'd like to ask you to answer that question now. So hopefully you didn't close your poll everywhere, but if you did, you can bring it back up again. I'd like you to give me just a few words on how you think we should adjust our programming. Okay, the first answer is where and how we advertise. Okay, true. If we are seeing that we're increasing in our younger population, if we want that to continue, we might want to target advertising in that direction. I'd want to know where people are hearing about us. Great. Is it word of mouth? Is it from, a bus advertisement, something in a newspaper? Okay, I like this next one that's coming up here. Spend time on how younger adults learn and communicate. It's a really good point. So the other answers were more enrollment based. This one's more instructional based. If we have younger participants, do they learn differently and do we need to adjust our instruction to meet their needs? Someone said maybe different times. The older students may have school-age children. Exactly. If we're seeing a 25 to 44-year-old population decrease, maybe our class times aren't meeting their needs anymore. So we need to adjust that in order to meet their needs. So great. This is one way you can use this demographic information to determine how you could possibly improve your program. And one more answer here before we move on. I would reach out to students from previous year to see why there's a decrease in that 25 to 44. Great. These are all great answers. Now I want to get into table 4. Of all of the tables that we talk about today, if you are half asleep right now, please wake up for this part. Table 4 is definitely the most important one. So I want to make sure you take this away. It's also the one with the most writing on it. So don't get too scared. But table 4 shows us the measurable skill gain by entry level. So we're going to take a moment to go over each one of these columns. First of all, once again, column A is the entering educational functioning level. So for AB level 1, the number of participants 27. This means that there are 27 students that started at AB level 1 this program year. If they move up 2 levels in this program year, that's awesome. But they're still going to show up under AB level 1, not AB level 2 or so on. If they stay with us till next year, then they'll show up in their higher level. Column B, the number of participants, these are NRS participants. So they have 12 hours or more of instruction, okay? And they've been assigned this level. C is the number of participants excluded from performance. Usually this number is 0 or very low, but Octave does allow us to exclude certain students from consideration. I don't have those reasons in front of me, but some of them are if a student is admitted to an inpatient facility for a certain period of time, if someone is called up to active duty military service, obviously if someone passes away. These are reasons that we can put into the system to have them be excluded. And the nice thing about that is, even though they may be a valid participant because they have 12 or more hours, they won't count for or against our program because you've excluded them. Column D is the total attendance hours. So this is the total number of hours that all of these students together had attended. And then we have our outcomes. Column E is a number that make an educational functioning level gain. So 11 of these 27 students post-tested at least at AB level 2 or higher. Great. F is a number who attained a secondary school diploma or its equivalent. These are our high school completion students, whether that is through the GED, the HiSET, TASC, the National External Diploma Program, whatever it is that you use. These are the students that have made that high school completion. G, these are the students that have separated before they got their measurable skill gain. So these are the students that left your program, unfortunately. H, the number of students that are still in your program, but haven't yet made a measurable skill gain. So that means there are 9 students that are still in this program, but they haven't made either their EFL gain or their high school diploma gain. These are a good group of students to target to see how you can help them get over that finish line. And an I would be the percent that achieve a measurable skill gain. So in our chart, those that had their EFL gain, those that had their high school diploma, these are the ones that have a measurable skill gain. Now I have to stop there because these are the students for their first period of participation. A few years ago, that's where we stopped. We didn't have to deal with this whole POP issue, but now we do. So the second part of the chart deals with all periods of participation. So J is the total number of periods of participation. K is the number of periods of participation with the educational functioning level gain. L is the number of periods of participation with the secondary school diploma. And then M is the percentage of the gain. Before I go any farther, does anyone need a quick refresher on what a period of participation is? Just want to throw it out there. You can just give me a quick shout out in the chat, or I could go on from here. Don't be afraid. Yes, I got one yes, that's all I need. So I don't have any charts on it right now, but I'm going to give you a quick refresher. So remember, when a student enrolls in our program, they start a period of participation with our program. As long as they have continuous enrollment without a 90-day gap of instruction or scheduled participation, they still can count as one student, one period of participation. The problem is if a student has more than 90 days separated from our program. So for example, let's say they come in the summer, they come back into class in September, then they drop out in October, and then they don't have anything to do with our program until, say, March. That's now been more than 3 months. When that student re-enrolls in March, we want them back in our program. You know, don't kick them out. You want them. But when it comes to considering outcomes, for Octave's purposes, they're almost like a whole new student. So when they start again in March, that is a new period of participation. which means they count separately. So if the student in their first period of participation didn't make a gain, okay, that's 0 out of 1. 0 gains out of 1 student. But if they come back then in March and maybe they do make a gain, okay, awesome. In that second period, they made a gain. But the problem is that kind of count like 2 students now. So you have 2 periods, only one of those periods of participation has a gain. So even though for that student, it's kind of like 100% gain, for your program, it's really only a 50% gain because you have 2 periods. First period, 0 gain. Second period, you have a gain. 1 out of 2 is a 50% completion. Now, is that fair? We could debate that. But the good thing that we found out is in my state, but also across the country, we don't have a lot of students that are in that situation. A lot of students either stick with our program without having the 3-month gap, or they leave our program and they don't come back. Now that's not good, but it means that it hasn't brought down our outcomes. And when we look at some other Table 4 data, we'll see that sometimes there are more than one period of participation. In fact, if we look at this AB level 2, we see that there were 71 students enrolled. But if I go all the way over to the total number of POPs, we see that there are 73 POPs. That means that I had probably 2 students that left earlier in the year, had a 90-day or more gap, and then came back later in the year. And that's just how it is. Okay. We want to service students. So even if they leave for 3 months and come back, welcome them back. But Octave really wants us to try our best to retain those students, to keep them going, even if it means we're setting up a separate class for them, we're doing some tutoring hours, something to keep them engaged with the program so they don't have that 3-month gap. Okay. All right, let's go on from there. Table 4B. Table 4B is a little similar, but somewhat different. Table 4B shows us students that have both pre and post testing. So it doesn't show us all the students. It just shows us those that have both a pre and a post test. And it only shows us the EFL gain on this one. So it doesn't have anything to do with the high school completion. So we see that here under AB level 1, the enrollment is 15. That doesn't mean 15 total students at AB level 1. It means 15 students at AB level 1 have both a pre and post test match. And then the rest of it's fairly self-explanatory. The total number of attendance hours, the number that made a gain, the number that left without a gain, the number that you still have without a gain, and the percent achieving a gain. To compare these 2 tables, Table 4 shows us all of our participants with 12 hours or more. Table 4B shows us all of the pre and post-tested students, which is usually fewer students. Table 4 shows us EFL gains and measurable skill gains in general, which means high school diploma. Table 4B only shows us EFL gains. Table 4 shows us all of the EFLs. Table 4B does not include ABE level 6, and that's because you can't make a post-test gain from AB level 6. You can only make the high school diploma gain. Table 4 shows us attainment of a secondary school diploma. That's not in Table 4B. And Table 4, this is not an Octave word. This is a Doug word, is the official outcome data. I always tell the programs I work with that this is the data that counts the most. Everything counts. No one from NRS can come down here and say, Doug, don't do this. But this is the data that counts the most. This is the one that we really judge the programs most on, because this is the how many students completed your program data. Okay. Whereas Table 4B is useful information, but it's only those that were post-tested. It's not the official outcome data. Okay, so take a breath. Stand up if you need to. I can't see you, so if you have to stand up and dance, go for it. Okay. Well, I can see Carmine. She's stretching, so we're good there. But all right, so what can we do with Table 4? Well, you can monitor your enrollment trends from year to year. That's an easy one. You can monitor your ABE versus your ESL enrollment. If your program is half and half, AB versus ESL, ask yourself, am I funding it that way? Am I putting resources where the students are? Do I need to start changing that? You can use Table 4 to monitor your cost per student annually. In these times of the pandemic, we might be seeing our cost per student change because we're probably having fewer students. So I think a question that's probably going to be asked of us I would say at the state legislative level and maybe at the federal legislative level is, hey, instead of having $400 or $500 or $600 per student, it's now costing you $1,200 a student. Are your outcomes matching that? I'm not saying that they are or are not, but that's something you got to keep in mind and maybe be prepared to answer. What else can you do with table 4? Well, if we look at the number of participants and the total attendance hours, do a little math, throw it in Excel, let Excel do the hard work. You can calculate the average attendance hours. From the average attendance hours, you could ask yourself, what's my minimum hours for testing? Okay, is it 40? Is it 60? Is it 70? Are my students just getting enough hours on average to test? Or are they exceeding it on average? And does that have any kind of match to their outcomes? If I see that my ABE level, let's see, 5 has an average of 55 hours of attendance, but I see that my ESL level 4 has a 76 average hours of attendance, I would guess, all things being equal, I should have a higher outcome on this one. But do you? It's something to look at. What else can you do with table 4? This column H is a really important one to look at in your second half of your year, especially right before your last class session of the year. These are the number of students that are in your program that don't have a measurable skill gain, but they are still with you. Why is that important? If you have limited time and limited resources, and I know you do, you can't call every student you have. Focus your attention on these students. These are the students that have stuck it out with you, but have not crossed the finish line yet, whether that is getting an EFL gain, maybe they haven't even post-tested yet, or getting that high school diploma. Spend your time on these students at the second half of the year. Don't kick out new students, but focus on these students. Maybe they just need a little tutoring. Maybe they need a little more online support. Maybe something changed in their life, childcare issues, their computer broke down, etc. It's worth your time to invest in these students because they're still with you. They made the investment. They've been coming to class, but they just haven't crossed that finish line yet. It's a good way to make use of limited time and resources. What else can you do with table 4? Well, as I mentioned, we have this first period of participation section and the all periods of participation. I've taken out just the percentage that achieve their measurable skill gain. Compare those two columns. If we see that there's a huge gap between the gains for the first pop and the gains for all pops, that probably means you have a lot of students that are generating multiple pops, and you might need to work on your retention strategies. If you're not seeing a huge difference, and you're going to see a little difference, if you're not seeing a huge difference, though, your retention as far as keeping them engaged from class to class may not be your issue. And we see in this mock program here, it goes from 38.7% to 38.4%, not a big drop. So in this case, worrying about our pops was not really something we have to spend that much time on. Okay, what can you do with table 4B? Okay, well, you can use table 4 and 4B together to calculate your post-test rate, which of course is something that all programs need to improve on, is how many students can make it to post-test. But you can also, if you're able to subset your population, if you are able to do a table 4B on not your entire program, but maybe just on students at one site or just on students that, I don't know, live in a certain geographic area and you want to see how they're doing, it's a way for you to analyze the instructional quality for those students. So let's do a little work with table 4 and 4B. So here we have the percent achieving an EFL gain for table 4. And just beside it, I put the percentage achieving an EFL gain. For ABE, we see that we have 34.4% of students making the EFL gain on table 4 and 36.2% on 4B. Okay. So I would say these outcomes are kind of low, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about look at the difference between the two. We see that from table 4 to table 4B, it is a 6% difference, but I've looked at a lot of table 4 and 4B comparisons. This is not a big difference between table 4 and 4B, and these are both low outcomes. So what this is telling me, if I was analyzing this, is that regardless of whether a student makes it to post testing or not, they're still not really completing the program. Only about one of every three student about are actually making some kind of completion. Compare it to the ESL program below it. We see in the ESL that it's a 32.6% completion on table 4. Again, that's not a really high completion. But on table 4B, it's a 55.4% completion. That's a big difference between the two. So if we're seeing that table 4 has a low completion, but table 4B has a considerably higher completion, that tells us something different. That tells us that when the student makes it to the post test, they're not doing too bad. In this case, the students that make it to post test, one of every two of them are making an EFL gain. Whereas in the ABE program up here, it's one out of every three, and that's not that different from table 4. So I have a question for you. 4B outcomes always should be higher than table 4 outcomes because table 4B shows you only those students that have both pre and post test. So getting it to post test is not a consideration. If we see that the outcomes on table 4 and the outcomes on table 4B are both small and there's not that much difference between the two, think about what you need to work on as a program. So once again, I'm going to repeat this for you. If you see that your table 4 outcomes are low, say around 30%, and your table 4B, which is only the students that made it to post testing, is also low, maybe 32%. What does that tell you about your program? What do you need to work on? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Okay, so I see instruction and engagement. Okay. Someone else said we need to work on retention and getting students to post test. Now, I want to stop there on that one. So this is why I want to bring this one out, because we're talking about 4 and 4B, comparing the two. And if table 4 and table 4B, those outcomes are almost the same, it's actually not about the post test because the 4B students made it to post testing and they still didn't have a very good outcome. So making it to post testing actually isn't the consideration here. It's always something to improve upon, of course, but that's actually probably not what we're looking at for this particular example. So I'm going to go ahead and move on from here. If we see that your table 4 and your table 4B outcomes are about the same and they're both low, I would argue that you need to focus on instruction. If 4B outcomes are a lot higher, then probably it's your retention you got to work on. Students aren't making it to post test, but when they do get to post test, they tend to do well. But if your 4 and 4B outcomes are not that different from each other and they're low outcomes, then it's probably an instructional issue because that's telling us whether the student makes it to post testing or not, they're not doing very well. Now, I use the word instruction in a very, very loose sense because there's a lot that goes into instruction, right? When I say instruction, I don't just mean instructor, I mean instruction. So I just want to give you a little bit about, what are these components of instructional quality? Now, this, of course, these are many, many presentations in addition to what we're talking about today. But keep in mind, if you're thinking about the instructional quality, we're talking about the instructors themselves. Do we have the right people? Sometimes we don't, or sometimes our instructors are poorly placed. Sometimes it's a curriculum issue. Maybe we don't have the right curriculum in place. That could be the textbook. That could be an online source. It could be a self-made curriculum. Professional development. You may have the right instructors, but you need to give them the tools that they need. So is the professional development tied to instructor needs? And more importantly, is it being monitored consistently? And is it being used in the classroom? The professional development coordinator we have in Maryland, something that she always pushes with local programs is you do a professional development, you plan it, you institute it, you ask for feedback, etc. And then you never follow up to see, was it actually used in class? And if you don't follow up to see if it's used, you don't know if it actually made a difference or not. So You got to make sure you follow up. The class setting, is the class location conducive to adult learners? My very first adjunct ESL class was in a kindergarten classroom. Kindergarten. Okay, these were adults. They worked all day. There were a lot of day laborers in my ESL class. And then at 6 o'clock at night, they're going to go to a kindergarten classroom and sit in tiny little chairs and expect to learn English. I would argue that's something that's not conducive to learning. And that was something that was affecting the quality of instruction. It had nothing to do with me or the curriculum. It had to do with the actual class setting. Scheduling. Someone mentioned before about if we have a change in the age of our students, maybe there's a scheduling problem. Maybe we have moved classes, or maybe our students are now no longer able to make that time because of childcare issues, or many other issues going on, of course. And then, of course, digital literacy. This is something that's most important of all now, because we have so many classes that are being delivered virtually. Are our students able to use digital literacy tools effectively? Do they have the skill set to use them? And also, do they have the access to use them? Okay, what do we do with all this? Okay, I call it closing the loop. That's nothing original on my part, but for the purposes of our presentation today, I want to talk about how you can use these tools to close the loop. So first of all, you have to set a baseline. Okay, look at your table 4 data, maybe for the previous program year, and say, okay, these were the outcomes. I had a 36% completion rate in my ABE program. I don't like that. I want to improve. Okay, you set a baseline. Now implement a strategy. From that baseline, what are you going to do? What are your interventions in order to try to improve that? Okay, if you're looking at improving instruction, maybe you say, I'm going to work on curriculum, I'm going to work on professional development this year. Or maybe there are certain sites that we have off campus or off site that aren't conducive to learning. If it's all virtual instruction, maybe I really need to work on making sure that my students have the digital literacy tools to be effective. That's implementing your strategy. And then, and this is the part that everyone misses, measure it again. Look at the end of the year. Look at the 2 year later, the 3 years later. Did you make an improvement? And then did you do something based on that? I know I used to write a lot of reports on the program that I was involved in, and it was very easy in the moment to say, between now and the next quarter, I'm going to do this in my program, and it's going to increase my outcome by 5%. Come the next quarter, I may have ignored what I said that quarter and come up with something completely different. And that is no service to the program or to the students, because I didn't look backwards and say, did that actually result in anything? Because if it was successful, I want to build on it. If it was not successful, admit your defeat and try something else. Don't be afraid of data. Don't be afraid of saying, you know what, this didn't work. Try something else, especially right now during this pandemic. All bets are off, right? There are so many challenges we have right now with access to assessments for students, access to classroom space, access to equipment and technology. This is a chance for us to try something new. So don't be afraid to fail at something, as long as you admit it and learn from it and try something else. That's how you get continuous program improvement. Do something with your data. Don't just keep it to yourself. Review it as a team. Most of the people on this call right now are from local program staff. Are you looking at your data as a team? Don't just leave it to the person using your database. Don't just leave it to the program administrator. Everyone should be looking at this as a team. Create avenues for additional research and analysis. Don't just stop at this data. Find other ways to analyze what's going on in the classroom. Do surveys, ask your students, do interviews. Use the other resources or other data that you collect. If you're at public school or a community college, you probably collect other information on your students. You can use that as well. And then make an improvement plan. Collect data before, during, and after to measure your success. And then make sure at the end you're telling your story with trainings, with professional development, through presentations, etc. Trend data is our friend. Trend data is a great way to show change over time. It's also nice and visual. So if you're trying to prove something to higher ups in your organization or to a legislator, I know everyone's working with Co-ABA to Educate and Elevate, use visuals, because some people don't like to look at charts full of numbers, but they like to see that the line is going up or a line is going down. Okay, so do that work to make it visual. You can show trends in many different ways: overall enrollment trends, AB versus ESL enrollment trends, your EFL gains, your measurable skill gains, average attendance hours, your high school completions. Um, but just make sure when you do that, you're comparing consistent moments in time. Make sure that you are doing program year versus program year, or first quarter of this year versus first quarter of that year, or quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, or trimester one, trimester two, etc. Make sure you're doing consistent moments in time, or else your data is going to look doctored and it's not going to be correct. And also make sure you do this kind of analysis before and after any major programming change. If you know you're changing your textbook, you should measure it before and after. If you know that you are changing the length of your courses, you should do a comparison before and after. Just to give you some really quick examples, here's a trend data chart on ESL enrollment by level. Here's my baseline where I started, and then I saw it increased. Did the strategy work? What should I change? Was it out of my control? Here's some data on comparing ESL to ABE enrollment. We see the total enrollment has gone down, but we see that the ESL enrollment has maintained steady while the ABE enrollment has decreased. Comparing different programs at the state level, this is something that we do a lot, is compare over time one program's measurable skill gain to another to see which programs are trending in a positive direction, which ones are trending in a negative direction, so we know how to support those programs. Next step, tell your story, right? You got to tell your story. Who needs to hear your story? So who do you need to share this data and analysis with? So just take a moment. I've been talking for a long time, so take a breath. Who needs to see this data and who needs to hear your story? I love it. The first thing that came up are your funders. Yes. Your board. Yes. If you are in an organization as a board of trustees, board of directors, board of, grand people in charge that make decisions for you, they got to see this information. Your partners. Yeah, your partners need to see this information. Students, I love it. Students. I'm not going to put you on notice and have you answer this, but ask yourself, have you ever shown your students how successful your program is? Something to consider. Funders, board, staff, media. Sure. Tell your story to the media. That's a great way to do it. Staff. I'm glad staff's becoming a large, word cloud here. The more you type the same word, the larger it gets. Staff's important. Tutors. Very good. One thing I want to point out that I haven't seen yet are instructors. Are you telling this information to your instructors? We spend so much time harping on instructors to improve your instruction. Do you need help with this? Do you have access, etc.? Are we telling them how we're doing as a program? It can be really scary to share your outcomes with your instructors, but I would argue it's a necessary step. It's something that when I was a program director, I didn't do it first because I thought, I don't want my teachers to focus just on completions based on assessments because there's so many other ways to measure success. At the same time, instructors are part of the puzzle and they need to know that when we're doing great, when we're doing poorly, how that affects funding, how that affects how we're seen within our organizations, how that looks at the federal level when it comes to getting funding for adult education. They need to be told that. They need to be part of that solution as well. So great job. You have to tell your story. At the local level, you need to tell it to your funders, tell it to your state office, your college, if you're at a college board of directors, if you're at a nonprofit, whatever board or organization body that leads that organization, make sure they know. Instructors, they need to know. For anyone that's at the state level, of course, we have to tell this to OCDE as part of our reporting, but also the state government and also your local association. The nice thing about having the state agency in charge of Title II funding, but having a separate agency that is the advocacy agency, similar to the local COABE, is that they're the ones that can do some of the advocacy that the state agency can't. So make sure that that information is being shared as well. Don't neglect your instructor input. Trust the instructors with their actual outcome information. Seek their input. It's a great way to tackle difficult subjects. I shared instructor information or instructor outcomes one time, like actually their table 4 for just their classes. The instructor was floored. They're like, I didn't realize I was doing this poorly. And I said, no, it's not that you're necessarily doing poorly, but this is what the outcomes show. And let's kind of talk about what's going on in your classroom. How can we improve it? And that instructor, because we had invested money in their professional development, they were a good instructor, but we wanted to improve their outcomes. That instructor, every session, always kind of kept a thought in the back of their head is, I wonder how this looks in my outcomes. And then they remembered, hey, when a student left the program or didn't show up for 2 days in a row, they let us know and are like, hey, I haven't heard from the student in a while, haven't been able to get in contact with them. Can someone call them from the office? Those kinds of things that help close the loop are really important. And the instructors are sometimes the only ones that have that immediate access to that data. So it's very important. Okay, further analysis. We don't have time to go through all these other things, but I just kind of want to show you some other things that have come up both in my state, but I've also seen across the web when it comes to analyzing further. A really neat thing is to do a heat map. One of our local programs in Maryland, it's in one of the suburbs of DC, did a heat map. Now, not this one, because this is a heat map I created for New York, just as an example. But they wanted to know where in their county they were not getting students. And so what they did is they took the zip code data that came out of their student database, and they fed it into a Google map that then showed a heat map of where their students are. So if we use this as an example, we can see, of course, the redder it is, the more students we have at that site. And so we can say, well, I have a lot of students in this region and a lot of students in this region. If I have off-campus sites, am I meeting their needs? Do I have something in this area? At the same time, you could say, well, hey, I have nobody down here. Am I not, do I have no students in this area, or am I just not reaching out to them properly? So a heat map is a neat way to get some of that information. Something that we use at the state office, this is a chart that shows the relative effect of one program's outcome on the entire state's outcome. So here we see that we have some programs that are smaller, and whether their outcomes are negative or their outcomes are positive, their effect on the entire state's outcome is small. But then we have larger programs that have very high outcomes. And so these larger programs that have high outcomes bring the state average up quite a bit. And then we have some larger programs that have negative outcomes that bring the state average down quite a bit. And so the reason why we do this is, of course, we know that larger programs have a higher impact on the total outcome for the state. But we can, when you express it this way, you can see just how positive or how negative that affects the outcomes. And we can say, what are these programs doing that I need to help replicate in other programs? And what services, what technical assistance do these programs need that I could help them to bring up their outcomes? You could do that. I did it here with local programs from the state level, but you could do it one instructor to another, one class site to another. If you were doing a pilot of a certain curriculum or so forth, you could do it with a control group versus a treatment group. There's a lot of different ways you could play with this data. Whew. Okay, that was 50 minutes of me talking. I always try to get through it as quickly as possible because I want to make sure that I leave some time for your questions. But I appreciate you. Thank you for staying awake. For those of you that stayed awake, this is my cat every morning whenever I'm trying to do my work. And this is her this morning when I was trying to edit this presentation. So she did not stay awake, but thank you very much for staying awake. So at this time, I want to know if any of you have any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat, or if you're able to unmute yourself, you can just speak through your microphone. Let me know if you have any questions.
I don't have a question, but I do think that this is really, there's actually a question, how do you get to table 4B and able link? I just, while you're thinking about that, this is a really helpful, like you got me like eager to get into my data again right now.
So unfortunately, I can't answer that question about able link because in Maryland, we don't use that. So I actually don't know the answer to that question. And I apologize that I don't. But I'm not going to pretend that I do. So hopefully, I don't know if there's anyone from the state office on here that can answer that. but hopefully you'll be able to get in touch with someone that can tell you how to do that.
That might be a Marty Ropog question.
Okay. So if you don't currently have access to it, of all the tables I showed, table 4 is the most important, but I would also argue table 4B is another one. If you have table 4 and 4B, teach your staff how to use that. And if you have the time, teach your instructors how to read it. They obviously don't need to be an expert at it, but it's important that they can look at it and say, oh, this is how we're doing, or this is how I'm doing. So they know how the program is doing as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have any questions, that's fine. I also know that it's almost 3:30 on a Friday. Well, 3:30 for me. And so I did put my email address in the chat. So douglas.weimer@maryland.gov. If you have any questions about the presentation or anything I brought up, or if you were just like, hey, can you take 5 minutes and explain something else to me, I'd be glad to help you with that. The other thing I want to let you know is that I'm hoping to develop a presentation on, this was designed for state staff and local staff. I'm hoping to design a presentation for instructors as well. So that's something that whenever it's available, I don't know when I'll get to do it at COABE or something like that. I'd be more than willing to share that with everybody as well, so that it's another tool you can take away from that. But thank you so much for your attention today. I've been enjoying the conference so far. I hope you have been as well. I'll stay on the chat for another minute or two if you have a question. Otherwise, if you think of something later, please feel free to email me. Thank you so much.
All right. Getting lots of positive feedback in the chat.
Great. Instruction to sell these as numbers from tape results. Okay, great. All right, well, I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and leave the meeting. Carmen, thank you so much for moderating and for checking the chat window. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'm sure you're tired by now and need a break, so thank you very much. Hope you have a great weekend.
You're welcome. Same to you. Thanks.
Bye.